I am telling you right now that if you don't have a Nintendo Switch 2, if you can't find one, that is capitalism's fault. Of course, I know everybody's gonna be wanting for the Mario Kart World content. And I'm not going to be able to deliver that. Not because I don't have Mario Kart World, actually. I have it right here. I got it in the mail shortly after I got home from vacation. I have the game, I just can't get a Switch 2. Can't find them. And I can actually explain... Here's something interesting. This ties into the interesting stuff I was reading over my break. Not only... Do I not have a Switch 2? A lot of people don't. I can explain exactly why there is such a shit show on release for consoles like the Switch 2, right? So, it is not actually an issue of there not being enough supply. I can tell you that right now. Nintendo has made doubly sure, ever since their products have been flying off the shelves at release, that for a highly anticipated console like the Nintendo Switch 2, or a highly, anticipated game release, whatever, although game releases you can get digitally, they are manufacturing enough of them. The manufacturing occurs in Vietnam. There's a Vietnamese company that Nintendo works with. I think either that or they own some factories in Vietnam and they manufacture it that way. They have made enough Switch 2 units to meet the demand for the Switch 2. That's not the issue. The problem is in the shipping and distribution process, right? So the global supply chain is fucked. Hello, bro, the boss. Welcome. I'm explaining why I don't have a Switch 2 and the problem with the distribution of consoles like that. It's not because Nintendo didn't make enough of them. They made doubly and triply sure that they manufactured enough Switch 2. There are enough of them to go around. The problem is the shipping system and the global supply chain. It is fucked, Kowalski analysis. The global shipping system revolves around profit making. This is not a huge surprise that, we live in a global capitalist world. So obviously shipping is going to focus on that, which means any corners that can be cut for the sake of making some extra money, those are going to be cut, which results in a lot of bizarre things, including stores constantly being in a state of bare shelves and understocking. It is actually more profitable, more efficient from a perspective of money making for box stores like Target, Best Buy, GameStop, Walmart, Nintendo's big retailing partners, to not stock enough of anything that they have because it would be more expensive if they overstocked stuff. They would need additional storage sites, warehouses to store excess inventory. Having too little inventory is just more profitable and creates a better revenue stream than having enough or too much inventory. So the sort of the shipping system sort of revolves around that once things get stateside. That's just one element of it. There's another element of it that because of the sort of deregulation of labor and stuff like that, people who work in the shipping industry no longer have steady, stable, and resilient connections. There's basically no resilience in the global supply chain. This is one dimension of that. Truck drivers that transport things, once things get into port, right? You've got port delivery, in LA or in New York or wherever. You just got a bunch of Switch 2s. Great. They're on these shipping containers. Now a bunch of truck drivers have to drive it across the country or even, more regionally or locally so that they can get them to the stores where they will be housed and sold. Your Amazons, your Walmarts, your Best Buy, your Target, and that sort of stuff, right? The issue is the way that they coordinate this is through fucking WhatsApp and Craigslist. Seriously, the global shipping network is held up by like the goddamn Facebook marketplace. There, like, it used to be the case that there would be prearranged legal agreements, contracts written in paper, and you know, a lot of logistics coordination between trucking companies and like manufacturing companies, shipping companies. Now all of that stuff is outsourced to a subcontractor of a subcontractor, you know, where you have these truck drivers that are no longer regular wage employees and no longer have these logistics management protections and like union protections and whatever. So they're effectively left to fend for themselves and like basically message whichever port they can get to see if there's like stuff for them to haul. Basically, that creates a very unsteady flow of goods to and from those stores, which are not stocking enough of stuff intentionally, right? That's element number 2. Element number 3 is at the actual ports. When the ships come in, the ships are not operating at peak capacity. The ships are not actually optimized to ensure a stable flow and steady flow of goods and services across the world so that people's needs are met. Again, the name of the game is profit. Cargo ships are too big. They carry a shitload of things into the biggest port that they can find, and then they go back empty. There's stuff that gets shipped out of the United States. Stuff gets shipped from everywhere to everywhere else. There's always stuff for these ships to pick up, but it's more profitable if they sort of make separate runs, because those represent separate contracts or separate like impromptu agreements where payments are made. If you are being truly efficient with your workload, trying to make sure things are steadily moving from one place to another, then, you know, your ship is full more frequently, more of the time, and you're making less money, right? Because it's like, you know, if half of your contract, your shipping contract overseas, is spent with an empty ship, that means that you can get twice as much money for the same amount of goods. Does that make sense? So that's the transoceanic shipping element. But then the element number 4, again having to do with transoceanic shipping, the ships being too big actually has major implications for whether or not countries are able to receive these goods and distribute them. There are not many ports that are big enough, or rather there are many ports that aren't big enough, I should say. There's a lot of ports, you know, one way or the other. There are many ports that are actually not big enough to accommodate these big, giant, you know, shipping tankers, right? So there's like a good percentage of ports in the United States and in countries across the world that just never see use, because the ships that would be bringing things to and fro are too big to effectively dock and unload at those ports. It would overwhelm those ports. And because shipping has been ever since like the 80s and 90s has gravitated towards like these much bigger and bigger ships, you know, these ports have fallen out of use, because that's most of the ships that there are these really big tankers, right? So you have, the ships are too big, ports can't take them. They're only hauling stuff half of the time to maximize how much money they make per haul. And then like truck drivers no longer have the kind of infrastructure supporting them that they used to. And like stores have a vested interest in not stocking enough things to sell them, right? And like all of this shit, it like leads to Nintendo can produce as much of their shit as they can to satisfy all of the demand for it, to such an extent that we should never be seeing shortages of this. But yet you still go to the store and it's like an absolute, like it's a scene trying to get a Switch 2, because they'll get there first thing in the morning and then within 30 minutes the consoles are all gone. And that is actually a capitalism problem. I am telling you right now that if you don't have a Nintendo Switch 2, if you can't find one, that is capitalism's fault. Because the whole global shipping network has been set up to basically be horridly inefficient from a perspective of consistency. It is massively efficient from a perspective of profit, but otherwise it's really not. You know? I gotta switch to, like, I just wanted Mario Kart World. Well, that makes, you know, that makes one of us. I'm on the other end of that. I couldn't get a Nintendo Switch 2, but I could, funnily enough, I had no trouble finding a physical copy of Mario Kart World. In fact, I'll open it right now. This came in the mail just a couple of days ago. I always typically prefer to buy physical media. See? There it is. Mario Kart World. But I still can't find the Switch 2. Because those consoles are fucking flying off the shelves. You know? And that's because of all those problems with the global supply chain and the shipping networks and stuff like that. Basically, we need to reform our way out of capitalism, because if, like, the global supply chain is extremely fragile with all the circumstances that I just described, and in order to have a stable globalized economy that is fit for purpose and that can meet people's needs, you actually need a lot of built-in resiliency. Think about how in 2021 what was it? The Ever Given, that tanker got stuck in the Suez Canal and held up shipping for like months, and it had massive implications for countries all over the world because one ship got stuck, you know, in one trade route. And that's partly wise, because there weren't these separate, like, any one thing going wrong could break the whole supply chain, right? If we had, you know, if there was more effort put into, you know, stocking things in advance, stocking more than enough of goods, at least that are non-perishable, that don't, like, have a fucking shelf life, like food or something like that, you know? If there was more effort put into, or if the priority was making sure that ports are all being utilized if they can be, so that we don't have these giant fucking abomination tankers, and making sure that these tankers aren't empty half of the time, so that goods are moving in as high a quantity as we can reasonably get them to be. Again, to have this global supply chain fit for purpose to meet people's needs around the world and do so consistently. It's all that inconsistency that builds up to make it so that one ship getting stuck breaks the whole supply chain, or also that the Houthis can block the Red Sea trade routes, and that has permanent implications for everybody everywhere else in the world. In the instance of the Houthis, they can use that to put some, you know, pressure on Israel, who's doing a genocide, but nonetheless, it represents a critical weakness of the global supply chain, one that shouldn't even exist if you have an economy this big and this complicated, which so many countries depend so heavily on, you know? So as corny as it sounds, I'll say it again, the reason that you can't get a Switch 2 is because of capitalism. Like, that's capitalism's fault. If we had a socialist economy that was organized around a democratic ownership of production, distribution, and exchange, even if it was like market socialism, which is like socialism light, you would not see these issues, not nearly as frequently anyways, because the incentives would be not aligned towards profit, you know, and corner cutting. What point is the money if you can't fucking buy anything, or if, like, everybody's starving, right? One of the physical copy, but the bundle only comes with a digital one. Physical copy is like 40 pounds more separately. Yeah, I made the conscious decision that I was okay with eating an extra cost if I got the physical copy, because the digital copy is subject to, like, if they shut down some kind of online service or something like that, I might just suddenly not be able to access it, and I really don't want that, you know? Thanks for watching, and support the channel if you would be so kind.